And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. It's great to be on today with our guest, Peter Gentala, who is the new president of Center for Arizona Policy. Peter, how are you today?
Great, Josh. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Well, I met Peter recently, and we're here at SoConCon, right here in Indianapolis. As we've mentioned in a couple of episodes that we've recorded here, it's a little bit like a big family reunion of those that believe that Scripture should make a difference, that we should apply biblical principles in public life, and that we flourish if we embrace God's created order. So it's been a great couple of days. So in meeting Peter, Peter has an amazing story as an attorney, working for ministries, also working in government. And today I want to talk about how, as an attorney, you can kind of impact the kingdom. You can serve vulnerable women and children, promote truth, but then also wanted to talk specifically about how some of that iterates in the state of Arizona. So looking forward to our conversation. So to dive just a little bit into Peter's background, the most important thing he would say about his life is that he is married to Allison, and they've been married for 27 years. And of course, that's for those that have been married for some time. This is something you work on. And then they have their 8 children. So he puts the family into this movement, I believe. So Peter's professional work focuses on the intersection between law and policy. He served at Alliance Defending Freedom, and then also has served at CAP previously, or Center for Arizona Policy. He also served as general counsel for the Arizona House of Representatives on to several ministries focused on children, including an organization called the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And so he has a long career, and then coming back to CAP, all through that, a theme of just serving God through his legal career and then in public policy. But I'd like to just jump in. Anything recently that God has just been working in, any recent success story that comes to mind?
Well, it's hard to look any further than what we experienced in the last month with this incredible term from the United States Supreme Court. For me, I think this term will always go down as the most prayers answered in a single Supreme Court term. We saw everything from the transgender movement and all the harm that has come to children through that disastrous ideology addressed directly and in very encouraging terms in the Scrimeti decision from the Supreme Court. We saw a truly generational win in the space of keeping children safe online. And as you know, Josh, that's been just a legal wasteland where it was almost impossible to see a win since 2003, the last time the Supreme Court looked at this. And then in the Paxton decision, they've created a new approach where as long as the regulation is designed to protect children and protect them specifically from harmful sexual images, there's now space for communities and states to get involved. So wins like that, the Medina case addressing taxpayer funding of abortion, just unbelievable. That's what we've experienced in Arizona. Is we passed a law about that in 2012. It was immediately enjoined. It went to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit, without much of a surprise, upheld the injunction. So we've never been able to see that public policy come into place in Arizona, and now we have a clear ruling from the Supreme Court. So all these things together, we're just praising God for all those victories.
Well, listeners will probably note, especially if you listen to our episode on a review of this most recent Supreme Court term, that Peter was able to summarize all those cases in about 2 minutes, and I took 35, I think. And so, but we're talking to David Clausen recently. I think that episode will come out before this one, about Dobbs, about this really remarkable moment we find ourselves in, where a lot of our predecessors who worked in this space for a long time spent their ministry trying to protect the sanctity of human life, fighting for some law that would protect kids online, and just ran into roadblock after roadblock. Now we're seeing these victories, and it feels like an opportunity to steward, but certainly something to be grateful for. So.
It really is. And then the deeper reflection is, what was God doing in those years when we were waiting and working and praying? And the answer is the same thing he always does. He's faithful to us. And some things have come back around that, to be honest, certainly on my less than better days, I even stopped praying for it. I didn't believe that they were going to come back. And so just to see the pendulum swing back the other way through God's faithfulness has been very encouraging, overall. So to me, it's a testimony that we're not supposed to give up. We're not supposed to give up in any way. And, for us in Arizona, where we had a very harmful abortion amendment added to our Constitution in the fall, it's a good reminder to us that we're not to be weary in doing good. We should keep trying. Pray that God would be merciful to everyone who is in the place where they're considering the worst and most harmful option, abortion, and pray that God would give us a chance to not only welcome every child in Arizona, but also protect them eventually in the law as well.
I was helping with just a little bit of media training yesterday, and most of the scripts were written prior to the final planning stages of the conference. And so before many of these decisions came out, and I was having a good time yesterday with the statesmen that were being trained for media interviews, say, well, you can add that, well, the Supreme Court weighed out these issues and they've already landed on it this way. And so again, it was just one more kind of exclamation point behind just what a remarkable Supreme Court term we had. Well, I wanted to move forward a little bit into just what led you into this space. Again, the idea of a Christian attorney is always a joke somewhere. It seems like it's always a great icebreaker when I go to churches. Oh, a Christian attorney, I thought that's an oxymoron. But I do believe God calls individuals into ministry in this space like he does into other areas. And so how did you feel the tug into law and public policy?
Well, that's a great question. And for me, it goes back to just what wonderful parents that my God has blessed me with. Mom and Dad have always been very conscious of being active and engaged in public life. I can remember for a significant part of my education, they homeschooled me. They figured out that I liked politics, so they got me a subscription to National Review. And we were always having these conversations about how significant public questions are. And so that was just the way we were raised. I mean, we were kind of the typical family that would discuss these things at the dinner table. And then when I was in college, Mom and Dad ended up being plaintiffs in a free speech lawsuit, a federal case against the city of Tucson, where I grew up. And so seeing them go through that process of standing for God's word, they were trying to hold a National Day of Prayer celebration in Tucson, Arizona. They encountered a viewpoint discriminatory ordinance and policy in the city of Tucson that basically said if you're a Christian organization, you can't have the same level of benefits that other organizations are entitled to. And they felt like something was wrong. They were able to find Christian attorneys to represent them in court. It was the ACLJ West Office, and that case ended up taking 6 years. And so it started early in my college education, and then lasted all the way through the time I was in law school.
Wow.
And then I actually momentarily at the very, very end of the litigation, the tail end of the litigation, I appeared briefly in my parents' own case and represented them.
Amazing.
So it was really neat. But all the way through it, I saw it from both angles. I saw it primarily from the perspective of my parents, who were just trying to be faithful and follow God and say yes to what he asked them to do. And then I was able to observe their attorneys representing them. And that's where the passion for this really got to me. It was just, hey, you can come alongside another believer who is taking a stand for truth, and God can use you in this professional role to be kind of the legal ambassador to bring these cases to the forefront. And as a result, all of us, community-wide, can have the benefit of that. So the case is still, on the books. It's Gentala versus City of Tucson. It's still good law in my home circuit, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And that's just where it started for me, and it's a blessing to have a start like that.
So at this conference, I was very encouraged by just some leaders in the Christian citizenship movement taking some time to say, how do we advocate for the family without losing our own? And there was just some great advice shared by some veterans, that have kids that are out of the house, that are serving God. And one of the remarks that definitely stuck out to me was just helping your children kind of see what you're doing, taking them with you, when possible, and letting them take part or see it. And this is certainly a great example of that. Well, they didn't set out to be plaintiffs in a lawsuit, I'm sure. It takes 6 years of their life for that purpose. But just in the course of ministry, we got to stand up. Now, like Paul, who used his Roman citizenship to appeal, we're going to take that to the courts. And so that's a great story, a remarkable example of just living out our faith and letting our children see that. So I wanted to move first into just, you've served as an attorney, litigating First Amendment cases, working in government, also protecting women and children. Are there maybe just one or two cases that kind of stick out to you that are super memorable?
Yeah, so that's such a great question, and it's been a lot of time. I'm going to give you the kind of the silly answer first. One of them that stands out to me because I'm reminded of it every day, at least every day when I'm driving a car, is one of the earlier cases that I was involved with both the Alliance Defending Freedom and with Center for Arizona Policy, was a case for the Arizona Life Coalition. And they were a group that is a group in Arizona that applied for one of those license plates, the Choose Life license plate. You have those in Indiana?
Indeed. Yeah.
So especially when those were first being sought, there was a lot of litigation because a lot of state agencies chose to deny that for a viewpoint discriminatory reason. They didn't like the message. Arizona was no exception to that. So it ended up being a case that had to be brought for a specific sub-agency of our Arizona Department of Transportation. And it took several years to be litigated, but that's another case that we actually won in the Ninth Circuit. Okay. And as a result, we still have these plates around. And so great. As I'm driving around, and sometimes you're in a good frame of mind when you're driving, sometimes you're in a not so great frame of mind. It seems like every now and then I just see one of these plates go by, and it's a reminder to me of how faithful God is. So that's one that I've enjoyed for many years.
That's amazing. Hopefully it's not the car that kind of cuts you off and it's like, oh, there's the license plate
right.
that I have. But no, oftentimes in our work, I mean, we move pixels around on a screen, and litigation just takes forever. So what a remarkable, just like tangible result of your work. So what a great case. Maybe one more, anything that comes to mind?
Sure. Well, this one is not so much about the result, it's about the process, but I'll just share. Ever since I was in law school, I was very drawn to the legal prowess of Ken Starr. The late Ken Starr, who's no longer with us, is a precious brother in the Lord. But I just really appreciated everything he brought to the law, and there were so many things about what he did as an advocate that just meant a lot to me. And so I started following him in law school. That was during the independent counsel days. So he had very incredible examples of his public advocacy. I can remember one time he spent something like 14 hours in front of the House Judiciary Committee and just answered those questions very, very well under intense, interrogation-style grilling. And so anyway, I always thought it would be neat to work with Ken Starr. Actually, to meet him. I didn't dream that I would work with him, but I always thought it would be neat to meet him. And the very first day I was on the job as the general counsel of our Arizona House of Representatives, I was a political appointee. There were people leaving, there were people coming, and so it was one of those awkward shuffles, through the changes of government. Wow. Yeah. And I go into my new office, and I sit down, and there's a pile of paper this high on my desk. And on top of it, there's a sticky tab, and it says, "Peter, call Ken Starr." And I was thinking, that's funny. There must be a Ken Starr in Arizona government that I'm not aware of, but it was the Ken Starr, and that was his cell phone. And it turned out that the prior speaker, who was being replaced by my boss, had already retained Ken Starr for a case that was going to the United States Supreme Court. Oh, wow. And among my first duties, it was to join his legal team and go to the Supreme Court. So that spring, I was in the Supreme Court for the first time, watching Ken Starr argue in person and having him, introduce me to the clerk of the Supreme Court and, all these different individuals that... Okay. It was just a neat thing to see a former Solicitor General, someone at the peak of his powers, engage in a very, very eloquent form of advocacy.
Oh. And you definitely don't want to act like you're some sort of fanboy, but it's still like, oh, Ken Starr, I kind of shake
it was.
Right. But what an incredible opportunity. To work with
and one thing I'll just share about Ken that was, really touching to me is his humility. I had the chance to, go through our offices And people will do a double take because they'd recognize him from TV or whatever. And it didn't matter if it was an administrative assistant or someone in the hall. He would always just pause and say, "Hi, I'm Ken," and shake their hand and treat them very respectfully and kindly. And when you've had the roles of president of a university, dean of a law school, Solicitor General of the United States, and federal judge, you develop all these honorifics that you could use throughout the rest of your life if you want. Well, Ken was just Ken.
Wow.
And that's the way he introduced himself, and that's the way he behaved. So it was really great.
It's a great testimony of humility, and definitely something I think that should mark our lives in public witness. So what a great example.
Yeah.
So you then moved over, you in your career moved into, as you mentioned, counsel or general counsel for the Arizona House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. And I think for some Christians, this mindset of, I'm part of a church, I'm a follower of Jesus, but then I joined this God-ordained institution with the duty of maintaining order, punishing evil. Could you maybe just explain a few lessons or insights from your time in that role?
Sure. Well, for one thing, I went from suing the government to representing the government.
Okay. It's like
and
defense attorney, prosecutor thing.
That was very interesting. And you've probably sued the government a time or two, so you can appreciate, the significance of that. It reinforced for me just some of the theology that I'd learned over and over again, namely that there are different spheres of authority, that God gives authority to us individually. He gives authority to families and parents. He gives authority to churches, and he gives authority to the civil government. And so watching people that I knew and came to know and love personally grapple with the authority that they held as someone who has some sort of a decisive role or an impactful role in the government was really interesting to watch. And then thinking about it from the terms of, I too have some sort of a new added authority and corresponding group of duties that I need to follow through and to really serve them. So that was really special to see. It also made me think differently about lawmakers, the number of pressures that they're under, the way that their families are leveraged, to say the very least. I would say under attack, even in a spiritual sense.
Yes,
Josh.
yeah.
You and I are. We've both talked about how important it is to watch your family, protect your family, pray for your family. Well, watching the pressures that lawmakers are under, the temptations that they have in front of them every day, it just reinforced for me that how crucial it is that we pray for our lawmakers as well.
Well, that's a great reminder. Just the importance of something we talk often about on the podcast, and that is if churches are discipling folks in other areas of life, like how to be a good mom or dad, how to be a good employee, it does make sense that we also should be forming people's biblical worldview as it relates to their role in government. And so it sounds like that had been done, and you came into it thinking about it in a biblical way, but also that encouragement to pray. As I've been in this role, 1 Timothy 2, it just continues to be emphasized in my mind how much our leaders need prayer. So it's a great encouragement. So a big focus of your career has been representing women and children, trying to protect the vulnerable. So would you jump into some of that work?
Well, this also goes back to something that God had for me during my time at the Arizona House of Representatives that I didn't really know was in front of me, but it was something that just kind of was put on your heart. I would say it's the ministry God gave me that I didn't expect or didn't see coming. And I think a lot of people can identify with that they set out to do one thing or they have a certain set of goals, and then God brings along a major ministry focus that they didn't think they would have before. But for me, it was protecting vulnerable children. I was in addition to the general counsel, I was the policy advisor for the Judiciary Committee. Okay. And in Arizona, that means all of the criminal laws, all the civil laws, the way the courts are run, and it includes the child welfare system or the child safety system, meaning where the government, is watching over kids and is doing its best to pick up the broken pieces when families fall apart or fail to come together in the first place.
So a couple of just very light responsibilities there. Like, these are incredibly complex. Yeah, wow, that's a lot.
Those are all serious areas, and I have to confess, I brought a bias into that also, and my bias was that social workers can't be trusted. That was the way I've viewed it, and that was partly from my homeschool background. Concerned about social workers stepping over the line and interfering with homeschool families, which are legitimate concerns, I think. And also, as an attorney, I represented families that had the social worker cross that line and do things like fail to honor the specific protections of the Fourth Amendment, in a social worker at the door type scenario. So the only social workers I'd really interacted with, it was through litigation in that sense, and I didn't really understand that perspective until I started looking at it more from also, okay, the state has a certain number of children in its care all the time. Now, I don't know what that number is right now in Indiana, but in Arizona, it's swelled to as high as 19,000 children.
Wow.
And the plight of those children, it's not 19,000 now, thankfully, it's lower than that, but the plight of those children became something that I was really taken with and concerned about and focused upon. They're at so much risk for so many reasons. And so that was something that I just really connected with. And when I finally left after 7 years, the House of Representatives, it was to join a child safety organization. It's called Kidhelp. It's nationwide, but it's headquartered in Arizona. And it was specifically because I saw the work they did in Arizona. And, I thought, hey, this is now that God has highlighted this for me, this is an opportunity for me to do something and really make a difference, for these particular kids.
Well, in Indiana, the numbers changed slightly, but something like 16,000 active child in need of services cases. Now, not all of those are out of the home, but still a significant number, like you say. And having interacted with members of the Health and Human Services cabinet in Iowa, hearing stories about the Governor Reynolds, and then being able to connect with officials here, I mean, that is a constant weight for them to carry. Sometimes there are fatalities in care, and I can certainly attest to the fact that this is not some just mindless government bureaucrat that doesn't care about those kids. And so that's a great weight. So I'm grateful that you're able to step into that. Specifically, how did that organization serve kids?
So Kidhelp runs in Arizona the Child Advocacy Center, or the largest child advocacy center. And for those of you that haven't heard this phrase before, Child Advocacy Center, it's basically a one-stop shop place where the initial steps of finding out what has happened to a child can be addressed when there's suspected criminal activity. Normally when a crime is being investigated, you have a crime scene, you have the police, and how is that crime going to be investigated? If there's injuries, you have a hospital, and if you're not careful, you can have the victim have these series of very traumatic appointments, and just the process of having them tell their story over and over again can be re-traumatizing. So the best way to handle that when it comes to child victims is a child advocacy center, and the idea is they come to one place. Hopefully it has kind of a calming, peaceful environment like a pediatrician's office, and that's where they tell their story one time, and hopefully to someone with forensic interview training, not just in general, but for children, so that they can have an age-appropriate conversation. And that interview ends up being what everyone else relies on to provide services to the child and to investigate the potential crime that was committed against him or her. And so when I say one-stop shop, I mean in one building you've got the police, you have healthcare providers like sexual assault nurses who are there to administer the examinations. You have counselors that are there to begin the conversations with the child to help them heal. You have the State Department of Child Safety like we had in Arizona. So it can end up being a whole group there. And the phrase that really got my 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 passion going for this area is the phrase multidisciplinary team. But the idea is the harm is so complex that we've all just got to work together. We got to drop our reservation about cooperation. If there's any turfiness going on, any jurisdictional chippiness, and that can happen among, especially law enforcement, stakeholders.
I'm sure that never happens. No.
Yeah, it tended to go away, and when it came to child investigations, and I just really appreciated that spirit of cooperation, and I wanted to be around it. So that's why I got involved with child advocacy centers, and specifically with Kidhelp.
And there are so many aspects to foster care, serving kids, and this is one I hope more Christians consider. It is a very difficult field. I mean, you are literally interviewing children about allegations of abuse and neglect and crimes committed against them. But who better to be there on the perhaps worst day of their life than those that truly care for these people and care for the kids.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that work. And then you also have spent some time we use the acronym NICOSI, but litigating on behalf of exploited children. Would you explain some of that work, especially as it relates to some of these companies like Pornhub, et cetera?
So NICOSI stands for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, and this organization, I'd known about it for a while because they do great work in the anti-pornography space, sharing the word about how dangerous pornography is, and helping states and the federal government limit pornography as much as possible. And for some reason, I lost track of the organization, and then I got involved with Kidhelp. And one of the things that I learned at Kidhelp was how frequent it was in very sad stories where pornography played a role, and usually not just a role, maybe the decisive role, particularly when one child is hurting another child. And of course, pornography, through the delivery on electronic devices and just through any type of online means, is spreading throughout our society, has spread throughout our society. And NICOSI got that. They understood the danger, they understood the peril, and they also did a great job of linking it to every other form of sexual harm, like sex trafficking, like prostitution generally. And I really thought that was helpful to recognize that all forms of sexual exploitation have these commonalities together, this sense of the dehumanizing of people, treating people like they're not created in the image of God, like they are a means to an end. And so the opportunity to work on cases that directly dealt with that, the exploitative mindset, and then the mindset that says, well, I'm not the exploiter, but I don't mind if I make a little bit of money from people who are doing the direct exploitation. That's called benefiting from sex trafficking.
Yeah.
And
what it is.
And it's very serious. And one of the great things I think about America's leadership in the world is that we treat it that way in our federal law, in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And so at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, I had the chance to be on the law center team, and we filed lawsuits against organizations that were making money off of other people's exploitation, knowingly benefiting from sex trafficking. Right. And I think that's a crucial part of accountability, and something that is one of the great hopes that, with all the dangers that are there online, will also introduce accountability and an incentive that corporations need to be the best versions of themselves, and they need to take responsibility for what they can do to help us all stay safe.
I'm so encouraged, and I hope listeners, and maybe God might be even kind of burdening your heart to go into this area of ministry, but what an incredible way you are going to have bad actors that are going to capitalize on people's the harms against them, against these deepest, darkest issues in their life. I remember a story of there being a video taken of a young woman and then uploaded to one of these porn sites, and despite every effort that she made, could not get it taken down. And so there's her being exploited in front of a worldwide audience, and you think of the harm that occurred. So what an incredible amount of work there, and I know that was close to your heart and won some big cases there. You have now pivoted back to the Center for Arizona Policy. So would you explain a little bit of how God kind of led you to that, and maybe just a few things you're focused on there?
Well, Center for Arizona Policy has been just a big part of my public and professional life, really my family's life. So many of the reasons why Arizona is a great place to raise a family is because of the work of Center for Arizona Policy. For example, we're one of the nation leading states when it comes to public policy that gives educational freedoms. And by that, I just mean the maximum number of choices that you can for parents. And that's helped my wife and I really design an educational plan for our kids, and even when the plan had to change.
Okay,
and it did change a lot. With 8 kids, you get more than a few curveballs, as you know, that along the way. So that meant in Arizona, we homeschooled for 14 years. Well, Arizona has one of the best homeschooling laws, and that's partly through the work of Center for Arizona Policy. We have been the beneficiaries of the tuition tax credits in Arizona, and that's enabled us to send our kids to a Christian school. That's again through the work of Center for Arizona Policy. And now for the last few years, Arizona has had one of the most expansive educational savings or scholarship account laws. And that, too, is something that really gives parents a strong choice about what they can do. And it also encourages the creation of more Christian schools, which is an important dynamic that would help every state, I think. So we've just been blessed by policies like that. And it's been my joy to work at CAP, to donate to the work of CAP through the years, to be a stakeholder when I was part of the State House of Representatives to work with CAP. And so it's an honor now to come back and assume a leadership position there, to follow my good friend Kathy Herod, and be the 3rd president of Center for Arizona Policy. It's just a really great honor. And I'm already finding that there's a confluence between the work that I've been doing and the work that we're doing now. And I'll just give you one example. We've been talking here at SoConCon about the age verification laws that have passed in 24 states. Yeah. Well, one passed in Arizona and was signed by the governor. Governor Hobbs vetoed this legislation last session, but she signed it in this session. And I'm just very grateful that she changed her mind and was open to a new perspective on that. I don't know fully all the reasons why, but I will say that one thing that's helped, I think, overall in the dialogue about these things is that Pornhub, among other actors, has been shown to be a bad faith actor. And even in outlets like the New York Times, they've been exposed for who they are and what they've done. And so when they are seeking a veto of things like age verification, it no longer is something that is a positive thing. It's kind of seen like, oh well. So at the very around the same time that our age verification law, which was sponsored by Representative Nick Cupper, who's here with us this week.
Oh, that's great.
When that was going to Governor Hobbs for her decision about whether she would sign it or not, at the same time, the New York Times was reporting that Pornhub had knowingly allowed child pornography on its website for a long time. And so those facts matter,
Yes,
I think.
absolutely.
They're out there in the
Absolutely.
public domain, and I'm just very grateful that Governor Hobbs agreed and decided to protect Arizona's children.
It's amazing. And when I think of succession, I know a number of Christian ministries are thinking about succession. It really seemed like a great plan, well executed, and there were even some videos put out. We can link them in the show notes that were just fun. I mean, just kind of celebrating Kathy's time there, and then you coming in as the leader of the organization. And with Pornhub being shut down here in Indiana, we were grateful to be able to get that done. And then the work in Arizona. It is always interesting in our lives as Christians, I think, to be able to look back and see how kind of God was weaving the various threads into this, this picture that He has for us. So it's a beautiful picture there.
Yeah, I heard a talk one time by Rick Warren about models, mentors, and friends. It always just stuck with me. It's like, okay, is this person a model, a mentor, or a friend? A model might be You may never meet a model. It might be Abraham Lincoln might be your model, you know. A mentor is someone that you have a little bit of access to and some proximity toward, and you just gain a lot of insight from just their personal example. Kathy Harrod is a mentor to me. And then when you're really lucky, the mentorship can also be a friendship. And that's what I have in being able to follow Kathy is just someone that I've mentored under for many, many years. Who is also a very close friend and a close family friend. You know, I think my wife Allison feels the same way, and so it's just a joy. You know, it's something that I think it's a kingdom relationship that's really powerful. But after I heard this particular talk or podcast with Rick Warren, I can't remember whether it was a sermon or a conversation like one of these. I just decided to start my model, mentor, and friend list, and doing that, it was kind of like keeping a prayer journal, because just writing that person's name down, model, mentor, or friend, started me thinking about what God was doing with different people's examples and different relationships in my life. And then all of a sudden, the answered prayers started to stack up through the years as I've kept this. So that's what brought it to mind for me when you were sharing that. Yes. I mean, the answer is, there's joy in the journey, and it is a major lift when God gives you a chance to work with people that you can go through difficult setbacks together. And across the whole line, there's the through line of God's faithfulness, our dependence on God, putting Jesus first, and then just having fun. You know, the ability that brings, being able to stand on the rock allows you to have fun together as well.
Yeah. And it's such a great encouragement to us. And one of the reasons when I met you for the first time, I want to have you on the podcast, was just the various ways that God has used your skills and abilities to serve the kingdom. And I think sometimes we do a little bit of hand-wringing of, I've got to find exactly the right position to advance the kingdom. And if you're just following God, here you have your parents that are doing that, inspires you, and then the various tasks that he's assigned you to, and now this current one. I think it's a good model to follow. As you said, just be joyful, take the next step, and God's going to work those things out.
Can I share a testimony about that?
Please.
You made me think, that's a great observation. It made me think about one of the things that the Lord has kind of helped me get over, and that is the sense of hierarchy that as attorneys we kind of have in our minds. We're very focused on structures of authority, and so when you have a role as an attorney, it's, at least for me, it's natural to be like, okay, I have this job. Now the next job I want to get is this, and then the next job. And I remember when I was in the government, I would think about my job, which was a great job, and then I would have in my mind, what are the jobs I would like to take next? And, what are the next, so you're always shooting for the next rung or a couple rungs on the ladder. And so what God did for me was kind of rephrase my goals. And of course he did it through disappointment about some of the rungs on the ladder. But then I realized that like my disappointments in this area are appointments. Oh, wow. And now when I go back and I think about a rung that I wanted before, I can't tell you how many times I've prayed the prayer, thank you, Lord, that you didn't give me what I wanted or what I was praying for a position. Wow. Because what your plan was so much better.
We heard it first here. Disappointments are appointments. So maybe you're going through a sting of that. I've certainly had some in my life. I can look back in the same way. Well, Peter, we could go on. There was one kind of last area I wanted to dig into just for a minute as our time comes to a close. But with 8 kids, and you've described all of these incredible leadership positions you've been in, most people are just thinking about how do you survive with that? So how have you balanced family life and ministry life so well? I'm sure we could ask Allison that question as well, and she might be, give us a lot of great information. But just how have you done that? And my understanding is when you took the leadership role at CAP, that actually your daughter introduced you, and everybody said it was an amazing thing, and she did better than you would have at introducing you.
It's so true. I can't deny that.
But there's some evidence of the discipleship that you've done within your own home and have done so successfully. So a lot of leaders out there are wrestling through that question. What advice do you have for us?
Well, I don't want to resist the premise of your question in the sense that, I think the best way to really test the premise would be to have all the kids here and what do we really think of Dad's work and how is Dad doing? Are you okay with Dad being in Indiana right now rather than Arizona? But overall, I would just say that family life is overwhelming. It truly is overwhelming, and it is humbling, and so it's a good test for everything else. The number of challenges, family challenges aren't more simple than professional challenges. They're more difficult than professional challenges. They hurt more. They're more nuanced, and so I think that it's just another great area where you have to lean on the Lord completely. And my oldest is 23 now. My youngest is 9, and my dad told me this, and I saved it away. But he told me like the major blessing is seeing God independently answer your children's prayers without your intervention, without you somehow stepping in and, playing any role at all, maybe even despite your failures, God independently answering your children's prayers and realizing that, hey, he's our God and he's our kids' God. And his faithfulness playing out is just the most, the first thing that I think of. I mean, the strategy is leaning into his faithfulness and entrusting him that just like he had a plan for me and he had a plan for my father, he has a plan for my kids. And then I have to pay tribute to Allison, who's just a wonderful, wonderful partner in life for me. I heard a sermon recently about when in Genesis, when it talks about the woman being the helper, I will make for him a helper. That word is used frequently throughout the Old Testament, and usually it's used describing God. It's describing God. God was a great help to me. God is the ultimate help to me. And so it's not like an administrative assistant type of helper. Right. It is more like the ultimate help. And so the ultimate help that I've had in terms of just the most important person in the world to me is Allison, and she's been just incredible support and leader in our home.
So it's not a dichotomy. I think for listeners, the main lesson and something I've been encouraged by talking to leaders recently. So growing up as well, you can have successful ministry, but you may have to just jeopardize your family. But if we lose our families, that we're not being successful in ministry. And so thank you for your example in that. Well, as we come to a close, any kind of closing thought or final word? I sometimes ask if you had a billboard on which to put something, but really just a kind of a final thought or encouragement for our listeners. You have had an incredible ministry and career serving the Lord in public square ministry. So just any encouragement for the pastor, maybe that homeschool mom that's at home with the kids, the Christian business owner that wants to make a difference.
Well, start with the homeschool mom. I think it's Psalm 121 where this concept of he will give us sleep or he will give us rest. Okay. Sometimes it sounds silly, but even relying on the Lord for just the simple get me through the next 8 hours prayer, feeling somewhat rested, that's a legitimate prayer. I've prayed that prayer as a father and as a professional. And it's okay to just plead with God for rest. It's a good short-term strategy, I would say, to ask God to give you rest. And of course, that is a promise he loves to fulfill. He says, I will give you my rest. And so I think it would be a great thing. And then as overall, I would just say the wins, the victories are ultimately one generation praising God's work to the next generation. They all kind of, I think, roll up to that somehow. And so it's for the Lord's glory. It's what are we building? Well, we're building another reflection of the Lord's glory and paving the way for more of the next generation to praise his works, just like we're attempting to do in our generation. And so from that perspective, how can we lose? What are we worried about? He will He will use us to His glory, and just doing our best to be part of that. The times that I've been most worried and anxious is when I've lost sight of that.
Well, beautiful and profound in the sense of we think so often of institutions, buildings, finances, but it's really that next generation. And you're right, the kingdom's going to be built, and we get to serve just a small part of that. So, well, Peter, it's been such a joy to have you on. Thank you for your tireless work building the kingdom, ministering in public life. I look forward to catching up with you further in the future.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. Appreciate the team. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks.